Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for Relational Databases Redefined on AWS. I'm just going to give it just a couple more minutes to allow some people to make it into the webinar, and then we'll get started. Okay everyone, I think we'll just get started now. Welcome again. This is Relational Databases Redefined on AWS. My name is Joe Ziegler. I'm a technical evangelist here with Amazon Web Services. You can see my email, zieglerj@amazon.com, and my Twitter handle, geosup, on the screen right now. Feel free to follow me, and I'll tweet out any kind of updates. I'll also go ahead and have this webinar put up on SlideShare here pretty soon so that you'll have access to that in a little bit. Okay, let's get started. I'm really excited to talk about our products, especially our relational database services. Hold on one second here. The great thing about it is with Amazon RDS, you get to focus specifically on your app. Now I can tell you, I'm actually a developer myself, and when I built my own startup using AWS, the very first thing that I used was Amazon Relational Database Service, or RDS. And that's because as a software developer, you know what I actually like doing? I like developing software. So with Amazon RDS, as we'll get into here in a little bit, you'll find that as a software developer or as an administrator or as an architect or as a business, you'll be able to focus more on building your applications and differentiating yourself in the marketplace than administering a database. So what do we mean by focusing on your app? You know, in a typical n-tiered architecture, you've got several layers that you're going to be dealing with. With RDS, we want you to be able to invest more of your time on the application tier, making this innovative, and less of your time actually managing the database tier, right? We want you to be able to treat the database more as a commodity, more as a resource that's there, facilitating you and enabling you to build applications, than actually a piece of technology that you find yourself maintaining and a service that you're always having to keep up. If you think about some of the tasks that people have to do to perform around relational database services, there's quite a bit. You've got software upgrades, storage upgrades, you have problems with hardware, you're going to have to do upgrades to the server, you're going to have to scale up, you're going to have to do backup and recovery. Now the idea with relational database service is that you focus more on the buck and you offload all of the muck. So you're focusing in on schema design, on query construction, on query optimization, and you're spending a lot less time dealing with migration, backup and recovery, patching. configuration, upgrades, and dealing with that underlying server hardware. If we take a look at what most people spend their times on when maintaining a database, and this is a report from Forrester, you can see a great deal of time is actually spent on installation, upgrade, patching, and migration. And in fact, if you look at this, there's a lot of time which is spent on just maintaining the database itself, security planning, backup recovery, performance and tuning, script automation, and even dealing with the licensing to deal for the database server. At Amazon, we call this undifferentiated heavy lifting. And what does that mean? That means basically, let's say your organization has the best database in the world. This is not providing you any kind of advantage in the business place, unless your business is selling databases, right? What you want to do is you want to treat this as a commodity. You want to have a reliable piece of software that you can use to build your business. And you don't want to be spending precious IT resources in order to maintain this software. So I want to talk a little bit about Amazon RDS, or Relational Database Service. And let me just give you a quick introduction about what it is, and then I can talk to you about how it's going to help you develop your software products. So Amazon RDS is a fully managed relational database service. You're going to be able to choose your database engine. It's very simple to deploy. It's a click and deploy infrastructure. It's easy to operate. You can scale it up vertically quite easily. You have different options to make it more highly available and improve reliability, and it's cost effective. Currently, we have 3 database engines that you can choose from when using RDS: MySQL, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server. For the MySQL database, you have a choice of Community Edition at 5.1 or 5.5x. With Oracle, we have both Standard and Enterprise Edition, both 11.2x. And the interesting thing with Oracle, we support a bring-your-own-license model and a fully licensed service that you can pay per hour. And I can tell you that's quite rare when it comes into Oracle technologies, in being able to actually purchase a license on an hourly pay-as-you-go model. And then we've got Microsoft SQL Server. And we've got 3 flavors of that: Express, Web, and Standard Edition, and all 3 are available in 2008 R2, and we have just recently added support for 2012. So you have 3 decisions on which database to use, and a few clicks, and you're ready to go. Now, the great thing about that is, even once you launch it, once you want to change your instance size or add storage to it, it's quite easy to change through the console or through the API. Now, I myself, I have managed quite large database systems, and I can tell you that having to deal with the disk is quite difficult, and having to scale up is quite difficult. But with our service, you can absolutely scale up, and we'll take care of that for you in the background. And I just want to show you what the LaunchDB wizard looks like. And here you can see several choices to choose from: MySQL, Oracle, and SQL Server. Any one of these you can select and launch immediately. Once you select your database, in this example, we're looking at MySQL database, you can pick your DB version. You can pick your instance class. So you can decide, hey, I want to run this on a very small instance and then scale up perhaps later. Or you can start a very large instance, and then if you find that you've got excess capacity, you can scale that down later. You can allow us to do minor version upgrades during your maintenance window, and I'll talk about maintenance windows here in a second. Another interesting option is the multiple AZ deployment. With that, you're actually going to create a standby, a hot standby that synchronously sent data from your master and stuck in a different availability zone to create a more highly available environment. You can also allocate storage, and you can change this at a later date. So you can imagine how difficult that is in a traditional IT environment if you have to add disks to your database server. It's easily an offline operation. It's going to take you time to actually put in those disks, and then you're going to have to reconfigure the database server to actually take advantage of that new disk space. We'll do that all automatically for you, and I'll show you a little bit more. And here's an example of once we've decided that we're going to launch a new DB instance. So MySQL, the database engine 5.5. We're going to have a general public license model for MySQL. Those licenses might be different if you're using, for example, an Oracle database. We're going to allow minor version upgrades. And during your maintenance window that you'll set up with us, if some kind of important patch comes out, we're going to upgrade your database automatically. We're going to have a quite large instance class in this example. This is an M2 4x large. And I'm going to do a multi-AZ deployment, which I'll talk a little bit more about. You get your database name, your standard port. You can do different DB parameter groups and apply those to your database. So you can set up some options for your database and apply those across all your different database instances. And that's about it. Once you do those steps, that database will get provisioned and be ready for use immediately. And the great thing about that, it's the same type of environment if you want to bring it up for development. If you need to scale with it, it's just a few clicks away. And additionally, if you want to provision a production-ready database system, it's the same number of steps. So let's talk about removing the muck. Specifically, how do we improve productivity, performance, and data protection? So productivity. So most admin tasks that are managed by RDS, provisioning. As you can see, everything's provisioned by a click. Database backups. We automatically do backups for you in the background. These backups are stored within the S3 service, which has 11 nines of durability. And that means that for every 100,000 objects that are stored in S3, we might lose once every million years. Actually, I got that backwards. So for a million objects, we lose once every 100,000 years. So you know that your database's backups are secure with us. Patching. We will do all the minor upgrades for you during your maintenance window that you allow for us. And performance management. The underlying server compute instance is going to be optimized for running RDS. So, productivity. Some interesting things about that. First of all, you can do standard user accounts with your database instance. Now, for MySQL, and actually for all the different databases, you're going to be able to use your common tools and drivers that you're used to using. So you can use SQL Workbench to get MySQL. You can use SQL Server Studio in order to access SQL Server, and the same Oracle client-side tools that you're used to using. You're also going to be able to import and export data using standard MySQL tools, or you can do the data import wizard for SQL Server, or even Oracle Data Pump that we've just recently added support for. You can perform diagnostics on the databases just like you would for your own self-provisioned databases. You're going to be able to use MySQL replication, and in fact you'll be able to create several read-only replicas when using MySQL. For security reasons, you can encrypt the connection between your clients and your database service. You can monitor metrics through native tools and additionally with our CloudWatch tool. And think about this. You don't have direct access to that file system or the actual instance that's running. How much greater is that security now that nobody is able to get into the actual database server directly? All that security is set up for you because we're managing everything behind the scenes. We really try to bring down the amount of administration that's required with RDS. We'll do painless patching and automatic upgrades in a maintenance window that you specify for us. We'll provide you with CloudWatch monitoring and metric alarms. One really great feature we have with RDS is within one click you can create a high availability cluster. And this is our multi-AZ deployment. With multi-AZ deployment, we will sequentially create a hot standby of your RDS instance, and we'll create that in another availability zone. This means in the unlikely event that if something happens to the availability zone that your RDS instance is in, we will handle the failover to the hot standby in the other availability zone. Now personally, I've created lots of different database topologies. I've set up replication. I've created clusters on databases. And I can tell you that it's a highly technical task. In this case, you can add multi-AZ deployment at any point after you launch your server. And you can actually remove it. And here you can see we have a backup retention period. These are the backups that are going to be streamed up to S3. We have a backup window that we have specified, and we have a maintenance window. And this is the maintenance window that we are going to take advantage of if we need to apply minor patches to your RDS instance, if you tell us that you want to scale that instance up or down vertically, or if you want to perform an immediate backup or snapshot. So one click, high availability with a multi-AZ option. This will do automated deployment across multiple AZs. You will have a synchronous replication from master to replica. That is going to be a block level replication that we will handle on our end. Plus, you'll have an automatic failover. The moment that there's any problems with your main RDS instance, we will promote that replica to a master instance. And at any point, you can test that failover. With very little work, you can also scale up. For example, you can add storage at any time to your instance, anywhere from 5 gigs to 1 terabyte of storage. You can scale the instance from a small to 4XL. You can add read replicas with asynchronous replication from MySQL. This means you can offload some of your query works to your different read replicas across your network topology. And you can also add Elasticache for performance. Elasticache can sit between your application and RDS and cache your hits and your reads into RAM to provide better performance and less load on your database. So let me talk a little bit about Amazon Elasticache. Amazon Elasticache is an in-memory caching service. It's based on the mcached protocol and completely compliant with that, which means if you developed your applications to work with mcached, you can easily port it over to Elasticache. You can provision Elasticache, and we'll give you an endpoint for your application. And you can configure Elasticache to sit between your application and your RDS instance. So this is really ideal for any kind of front end to RDS if you've got read-heavy applications. It also provides you with low latency. As it caches to RAM, you'll find that the performance is going to increase dramatically. Now, another technology that we have is read replicas. And this is something that you can provision quite easily through the console or through the API. This will allow you to create complete copies that will stay in sync with your read master using the MySQL technology. And then basically what it's going to do is create an asynchronous replication to the replicas. And this is really perfect for heavy loads, especially if you're running different kinds of reports on different servers. You can use that read replica. So people will ask themselves, well, what would be the difference? Why would I use replicas and why would I use caches? So caches are going to be very good for low latency access or limited data sets. And one thing to remember about caches too is they are volatile. Sometimes you could lose a cache and you're going to have to reprime and build that cache up again. Replicas, though, they're going to provide less performance. It's still a relational database service underneath everything. But you can provide you with performance across your entire data set, right? So for caches, for example, any of those reads, the first read that you're going to have go through a cache is going to go into that cache, and subsequent reads are going to benefit from that caching technology. For read replicas, you basically have a complete copy of that database that's staying in sync. It's going to perform just like any other database. The idea is, though, that you're spreading that load across several database servers. A new feature that we've just introduced is called provisioned IOPS, and that is also available in Amazon RDS. Provisioned IOPS are going to give you fast, predictable, and consistent I/O. Now, when using it with RDS, you can provision anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 IOPS. And you can provision it anywhere from 100 gigabytes to 1 terabyte. So this is going to be very important for our customers who need to have a consistent I/O experience, especially if you're doing OLAP type applications or even OLTP applications that's really intensive in the transactional nature and doing quite a bit of I/O with transaction logs. You can provision those IOPS directly through your interface when you create a new RDS instance. So a couple of customers who are using RDS is Flipboard. So Flipboard actually built entirely on Amazon Web Services, and they run EC2, RDS. They're taking advantage of Elasticache, and they're also using a multi-AZ deployment. 100% of their infrastructure is running on AWS across multiple availability zones. So here you can see it's a quite big startup, many customers, and they're using RDS in a production environment. In addition, they're using EC2, SimpleDB, Simple Queuing Service, CloudWatch, Elastic Load Balancing, Simple Storage Service, CloudFront, and Amazon Mechanical Turk. They actually have hundreds of Amazon EC2 instances that they're using that are talking to their RDS services.
That's okay.
Goomy is another customer using RDS. Goomy actually has one of our largest RDS instances. They are using a CX large, high CPU, extra large instance with RDS. Goomy is a gaming company out of Japan, and they outgrew their existing IT environment quite quickly. Goomy, being a gaming company, has a very variable workflow. Sometimes they have quite a high load on their servers, and sometimes less of a load. And they're right now able to handle 10 million visitors a day for their gaming site using Amazon RDS. Let's talk about data protection. So one great thing about using RDS is automatic snapshots. So you get a database, you get a daily database backup up to 35 days. In addition to that, though, your transactional logs are backing up every 5 minutes. That means everything up to the final 5 minutes can be recovered. You can do a point-in-time restoration on your RDS instance. Now, with automatic backups, you can also do a point-in-time backup. By default, we give you a 1-day retention, but you can extend that up to 35 days. And this extra storage we actually provide you free of charge, based upon the amount of initial size that you created for your database. So for example, if you provisioned 10 gigabytes of database storage for your instance, we will provide you with 10 gigabytes of automatic backup storage free of charge. You can use more storage if you want to, and you'll be charged at the normal storage rate for that. DB security groups. So by default, all DB instances are isolated by default. You can control access by source IP, or you can use EC2 security groups. We discourage you to be able to open up your database entirely to the whole world. This will allow you to create a granular security service. You can have multiple tiers of your application, each secured by its own virtual firewall. We have many customers who are using RDS in the virtual private cloud, or VPC. Now, with VPC, you're able to bring your own IP addresses. You can create your own network control, public and private subnets. You can spread it across multiple AZs. You can create your own virtual routers. We have a lot of enterprise customers who are able to launch RDS within VPC. You can effectively create your own DMZ with your RDS instance inside the private subnet and exposing your public subnet into the internet if you've got, for example, a public-facing application. For data protection, you can encrypt via SSL. This means that that endpoint that we expose to you will be over port 443 with a certificate. This means all the connections between your client application and RDS will be encrypted by default. Very simple to do too. You can load your certificate into our system and immediately turn on SSL. So a great enterprise customer that's using RDS and other Amazon Web Services is Samsung. So Samsung is not actually interested in running IT departments. Samsung is interested in creating television. Lots of televisions. They saved over $34 million using Amazon Web Services. Now, they've got quite a few RDS instances that they're using. This is directly in their production environment. They're looking at somewhere between an 80 to 90% cost savings compared to using a traditional hosting environment. Okay, some bonus items for you. Reserved instances. Once you figure out how you want to do your workflow on us, you no longer have to do a pay-as-you-go model. You can use what are called reserved instances. Now, reserved instances allow you for a one-time fee to run RDS at a reduced hourly cost. Basically, with the reserved instance, what you can do is you can tell us what kind of a region you actually want to run your RDS instances. You can give us the size of that instance, and you'll immediately start to get a discounted hourly rate. You can choose between a low, medium, and high utilization rate. These will have different varying upfront costs with reduced hourly rates. And for a heavy instance, if you want to commit to up to 3 years for that instance, you can look at a cost savings of up to 71% over a pay-as-you-go model. Reserved instances are purely an accounting function. If you're running with us currently and you're running on a pay-as-you-go model, you can purchase a reserved instance, and as long as that reserved instance matches the same pay-as-you-go instance that you're already running, you'll just be automatically charged at that reduced rate. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to relaunch that instance. It's no effort whatsoever on your own part. This is quite interesting. I see a lot of customers that are using RDS, and they kind of surprise me in this. They're using it to give their developers access to development data. Now, if you've ever had a lot of big development projects, you know that creating really good test data can be difficult. And in some scenarios, production data is quite suitable for developers to use. Now, when you actually restore an RDS instance from backup, it creates a new instance for you. What this means is that you can empower developers to take those backups, and at any point in time, they can replicate your production data for their development environment. And then they can pull that RDS instance into their own sandbox. You can imagine how much more powerful that is. As a developer, I have the ability to test my code against the actual type of data and even that actual volume of data that I might have in production. Now, this might not be suitable for everybody's workflows, but if it is, you can see how much of an improvement this is in your development environment and how agile it can be to allow your developers to be able to provision their own databases instantly with production data. A new feature that we've just introduced in the last couple of weeks is the ability to promote your RDS read replicas to primary. So if you're using MySQL and you're creating these read replicas that are in sync, you think to yourself, well, what kind of benefit do I have for that? And the interesting benefit for that is you immediately have an instant copy of that production database up to date. Now, if you've ever had to do any kind of complex sharding operation, you know how difficult it is to get that data to move around. So just briefly, sharding, for those of you who might not know, sharding is basically taking an entire database and chopping it into logical units that make sense so that you can spread that load across multiple databases. So for example, you might break your customer database across people's last names. Or if you've got an order database, you might pull the older orders out of that database and put them into another database instance. By promoting your RDS read replicas to primary, it means you can immediately make copies of the entire database. So if you're sharding that database, what you can do is take that master database, have read replicas running, promote those to masters, and then remove out that data that you're trying to shard. And you'll immediately have several databases up to date with that data chopped between all those different databases. And now you can spread that load and you can scale up much easier. I've done database sharding by hand before. It's a very difficult task, and this makes it quite a bit easier. So additionally, we now have the free tier. If you ever sign up for AWS, you know about our free tier. You can go to aws.amazon.com/free, and you can see all the benefits of the free tier. Well, now you can run RDS free for 1 year and give it a shot. And you can pick either in MySQL, Oracle in a BYO model, or SQL Server Express. So this is your opportunity to go ahead and kick off this service, try it out, give it, kick the tires, see if it's something that you want to use, and there'll be no charge for that. So we talked a little bit about how you can focus on your app with Amazon RDS. Specifically, Instance scaling. At any point in time, you can take your instance and you can scale that up vertically, and during your maintenance window, we will go ahead and change that instant class. Very interesting thing too is if you're using our multi-AZ feature, the really cool thing that also happens, not only are you creating something more highly available, but when we do backups, we'll actually do backups on the standby, which means backups will not take any type of CPU performance off of your main instance. Additionally, if you told us to perform some kind of maintenance during the maintenance window, for example, adding disk space or scaling your database instance up vertically, maybe you're going from a medium instance to an extra large instance. Well, normally something like that, when we change an instance type, that's going to be an offline operation because we actually have to create a new EC2 instance based upon the AMI that's created from your old instance. If you're doing a multi-AZ option, we will actually go ahead and scale up the hot standby, move the application over to that hot standby, the new scale, and then scale up your original master all in the background seamlessly to you. That means the multi-AZ option, not only does it create more high availability, but it means that your maintenance windows will go from some offline operations to online operations. We talked a little bit about performance. You can add provision IOPS to your system, right? Backups. We will do daily backups to you and back those up to S3, and then we'll also be able to do your transactions every 5 minutes, so you can do a point-in-time restore. Disaster recovery. You can use it. You can immediately create a restoration of these backups, and a new instance will come up at any time you want, all through the console or through the API. And storage scaling. Anytime you want, you can add more storage to your RDS instance. This means you can do faster updates. You can apply new features, and hopefully you'll have happier customers. Think about the agility that you can have when you have this type of environment. At any point, you can create a copy of your database at a point and click. You're not spending time administering the database. You're not applying security patches. You're not adding disks and having to migrate systems over. Okay, well, I think we're going to start to come over, and I'll be able to answer some questions for you. Before I do want to point out that here, if you're in Australia, and especially if you're around the Sydney area, we have an AWS Customer Appreciation Day happening. And that's happening November 13th at the Westin. And I think this is going to be a very big day for Australia, so I hope that you can register for this event and attend it. So I'm going to go through some of these questions that you had online. If you haven't added any questions, please feel free to start asking these now. I will not be able to get to all your questions, but I tell you what, you're going to have my email address, you're going to have my Twitter handle. If there's something that we don't answer, you can get hold of me, and I will make sure that somebody will follow up with you. All right, so let's go through some of these questions that I've got here. Question number 1, any plans to support NoSQL DB? So right now, I did not actually bring this up in this particular presentation. This was specifically for the relational database services. We do have 2 NoSQL database options available as a service. Both of them are highly available. Our original offering is SimpleDB, a quite easy to use name value pair store, and DynamoDB. And DynamoDB is quite interesting because it has provisioned throughput. So it's our NoSQL database that you can tell us how fast you want it to run, and no matter how much data you put into it, we're going to meet those parameters. So you can tell us how many reads per second that you want on it and how many writes per second that you want on it. And at any time in the future, too, you can adjust those settings, and we'll scale it automatically. And in the background, it's actually backed up by a bunch of solid-state drives. In addition to that, you can absolutely run your own NoSQL database within an EC2 instance. You can install CouchDB or Mongo within that instance and manage it. Those are pretty much our NoSQL offerings at this point. Can we use CloudWatch to automatically create read replicas depending on DB performance and scale down when traffic is low? So everything within AWS is actually an API. So CloudWatch itself does not have the ability to auto-scale RDS. CloudWatch does work with auto-scaling when you're dealing with EC2 instances, and it'll help you scale it out horizontally. However, given that CloudWatch is an API, you can read the outputs from CloudWatch, and you can issue any kind of command that you want as you would through the console using that application program interface. That means if you wanted to, you could create new read replicas based upon the CloudFormation metrics, And you could scale down the database. However, keep in mind, when you do vertical scaling with RDS, that's going to happen during your maintenance window. And so it's not something that happens quite quickly. It's going to happen, in a batchy overnight process. You can force auto-scaling to happen now. Or I'm sorry, you can force it to take that new instance type if you're scaling up or down now. The problem with that is it will take the database offline during that scaling event. What you could do, if you want to get really fancy on it, is you could go ahead and have a multi-AZ option and try to force that to go ahead and scale now. But to be honest with you, the way databases work and reprovisioning the databases, the amount of trouble you're going to get out of that, I don't know if you're going to get savings on the back end from a smaller instance. So I think that's something you're going to have to try and decide whether that's important to you. What some people do, however, if you are really cost conscious, is you could scale down, for example, the database over the weekend, and maybe you've got less people who are actually using the database. Or if you've got a system that's quite batchy. So let's say you've got a payroll system or an expense system, and 3 weeks out of the month people aren't doing much with it. You could absolutely scale that up and down over the weekend based upon that workflow. Or, for example, if some people run reports overnight, that's something else you could scale up and down. I think that's probably where you'd find more benefit. Any chance of doing native MySQL replication? A slave RDS with a non-AWS master. So for right now, for MySQL, we're actually using native MySQL replication for our read replicas, and that's pretty much the only way that we're using it. So I don't know if we have announced any plans to use that in any other way. Let's see. Is there a DB load balancer that can distribute incoming loads between multiple DB instances? So there is an option there. If you are using, the database is going to be sitting there on whatever port that you've set up on it. If you have a multi-tiered architecture and you're using VPC, you can place the elastic load balancer between the application and the database to distribute that load. That's a recent feature that we've added. Originally, elastic load balancer could only be sitting at the very front end, the web-facing portion of an application. But by running it within VPC, you can actually put it through those multiple tiers. So we do have customers that are using ELB between their application and their database. Should you have separate RDS instances for each application, or is it acceptable to have one instance for multiple databases, etc.? That's going to be very specific into how your application works and your cost structure. So it could be, for example, that multiple small instances is going to cost you more than a single medium instance. So that is something that you're going to have to decide. The cool thing, though, is the ability to experiment on us. So you can absolutely try this out. So in this scenario, here's what I would do. I would put everything on one database. I would experiment with that. You can play around with it in development. You can hammer it within the different applications, see the performance, try it on different sizes, right? Within your development environment, at any point in time, you could scale it up and down or make a different copy out of it. And you can decide how that performance is. If it turns out that it works better on multiple smaller instances, it'll be very easy to go to that. Let's say even in your production environment, let's say for now, for the first year, you're running everything in one certain size instance. Well, we just showed you that feature about promoting read replicas, right? You could shard across the different tables. You could create read replicas, go across those different tables, bring those up as new instances, point your applications across those instances, and then scale those up and down. And I think that's one of the great things about an environment like AWS. It gives you that ability to really experiment. It gives you the ability to fail forward, as we say, so you can experiment a lot, decide if something works or not. And the cost is quite low. If you want to provision a super extra large database, you can provision it just for an hour and decide if that's what you want to use. If you want to decide which database engine to use, you can run your application against MySQL. You can run your application against SQL Server. You can decide if Oracle is the right solution for you. I mean, I can't tell you, when I used to do development before, how difficult it would be to actually say, hey, I want to experiment with Oracle. I'd have to go out and buy that Oracle license. And now, you don't have to do anything like that. Is an RDS facility like a server that we can RDP into? Also, if we install any other software on that server. So RDS absolutely is not a service like that. So one of the things that you're going to set up with RDS is we're taking away that control. So you can't SSH into that machine, and you can't RDP into it or any kind of remote access. So that means that your particular use case has to be that you don't need any kind of special software installed onto that RDS instance. For example, some people want to install server software if you're running SQL Server. If you've got that requirement, RDS probably is not the right solution for you. Instead, it's probably going to be the type of solution in which you want to put in your own instance in EC2. So you can always load a database within an EC2 if you need that level of control. You'll unfortunately be giving up all the benefits I talked about with RDS. Is it possible to replicate MySQL database from local data center to AWS? You could do that, but what you'd end up doing for that is using the native MySQL tools. And so you'd actually have to do the import and the export. You couldn't actually set RDS up as a replica to receive from a master that's outside of RDS. Can the multi-AZs be in different AWS regions? No, they cannot. So just to give an overview, the way that we actually have our global infrastructure, we have a concept of a region. A region is a geographical location in which we've got our services. Within a region, we break these down to availability zones. You can think of availability zones such that they're connected together. They're basically like data centers, and they're connected together with low cost, low latency networking. If one data center goes down, you can fail your application over to the other data centers. So this allows you to build high availability applications and very easily take advantage of several data centers. Now, as a policy within Amazon, we don't move data between regions. A region being, for example, Singapore we have as a region, Tokyo as a region, South America as a region. And that's because people pick regions based on several things, whether it's cost, or sometimes it's geopolitical reasons, sometimes it's tax reasons, sometimes it's compliance reasons. And so we never move data between those regions. If you want to change the size of the database on a production RDS, the change is immediate, or we need to wait for AWS to process the capacity upgrade. So you've got a couple of choices there. You can force that change immediately if you want. The downside is if you force that immediately, that might take your database offline as we scale it up. The way you can get around that is to do the multi-AZ option. So with the multi-AZ option, we can fail you over and scale you up and then bring it back online. If you don't want to apply that immediately, it's going to be applied during your maintenance window, and it's going to be an operation that's going to take a couple of minutes. And during that couple of minutes, your application may not have access to the database. Is scaling automated or need to be done manually? Scaling in this case is really with databases. I mean, databases they're a bit more difficult to scale, and you're usually stuck with a scenario where scaling is a vertical event. So scaling is change in the EC2 underlying EC2 instance. In that case, that is something that you will have to manually do. To scale out horizontally, you're looking at creating read replicas or sharding the database, and that is also something that you're going to have to do on your own account. So unlike auto-scaling when it comes to EC2, and auto-scaling basically, if you've got an application if you add more servers to that application, you're able to serve more of your customers. Auto-scaling allows you to easily add more web servers, for example, to your server pool based upon some metric. There's not really an equivalent service for RDS, and that's just because I think the databases, the intricacies to do scaling is quite a bit more difficult. How do we gain access to SQL Server Management Studio, given this is all in the cloud, please? So you can absolutely use SQL Server Management Studio. You just have to point it against the endpoint that will provide it to you when you provision your SQL Server database. So the whole SQL Server Studio will work. It's just going to be just as if you would access any remote server. Any tools, however, that you're used to running directly on that server within that actual machine will not be able to be run against SQL Server RDS instance. However, you can still do everything that you would normally be able to do for a remote instance, and you can certainly even run T-SQL commands that give you different performance counters, performance metrics. Let's see if I got any other questions here. Let's see. Any more questions? Just checking through the questions, folks. RDS. Okay, we're just grabbing a couple more questions. Thanks for your patience here. Okay, here's a really good question. So I need to mention this for SQL Server. If you want to use SQL Server in an RDS environment, at this point it only supports SQL authentication. We have a lot of customers who have asked, when will it support Windows authentication? And the only thing I tell you is that we know that's quite important to you. It's actually a bit complex. It's going to involve, of course, integration possibly with Active Directory. So the only thing I can really say for that is please stay tuned for that. Also, at Amazon, what we tend to do is we follow a very agile approach when we create services. And we launch services usually in kind of a minimum viable state. SQL Server being a service, the most recent of our full-fledged database services that we have launched, is still a bit behind the other services that we've launched earlier. And so we're going to keep working on those. So, for example, SQL Server not supporting multi-AZ right now. SQL Server also, another restriction that I should mention, you can't actually add disk space to SQL Server. There's a dependency with the technology when it has to do with disk striping that is holding that back. There is actually an online FAQ. If you go onto the AWS console, you'll find there's an RDS FAQ, and that will cover some of those intricacies that I'm talking about right now. So there are a few caveats when it comes to SQL Server. How is performance in Asia? So right now, if you were within Asia, you'll probably be using RDS within either our Singapore or Tokyo region. I would most likely advise you that you'd want to use your EC2 instances within that actual region. So you wouldn't want to host that database application perhaps separately with on-premise software applications. I think you'd find that the latency is quite high. However, you can give that a shot. There's no reason why you can't try it out and see if that latency is okay. But the vast majority of our customers are going to use EC2 instances to run their application, talking directly to RDS. They might isolate that within a VPC, virtual private cloud service, and extend that through their data center. But databases, they need low latency, they need high I/O. Let's see here. So I think we've gone through most of the questions, and hopefully you guys got something out of this presentation. I'm very excited about this product. I can tell you that as a developer, this is one of the very first things I jumped on. I really did not want to be the person. I love developing for databases. I'm not somebody who enjoys keeping those databases running. So I think this is a really good product for you. I hope you guys try it out. If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email. You've got my information up on the screen right now. You can follow up here at aws.amazon.com/RDS. You can read the FAQ there. And try it on the free tier. Experiment with it. See if it's something that's really good for you. And if there are features that are missing, if there are things that you want it to do, let us know. I mean, we drive all of our features from our customers. We're very customer-centric. We want to build the best products we can for you. And the way that we can do that is if you tell us exactly what you want. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it. I'm Joe Ziegler for Amazon Web Services. And thanks again. Bye.